All right, everyone, welcome back. This is The Last Defense. This is your host here, DC, coming to you with the news of the latest update. Now we're going to take it across the pond and actually find out what's going on with the US national debt. Seems like there's been a bit of a crisis that's unfolded, and we're going to see a little bit what's taking place there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you and give you the headlines. So we have here the US national debt. So as of August 18th, the US national debt has officially hit 40 trillion US dollars. And we have here the House Budget Chairman, Jody Arrington. He's a Republican from Texas. And he's actually called out a bit of the chaos that's been taking place now that the government debt has hit 40 trillion, the sovereign debt. Now, looking into this, we see the statement that's been officially released, and it says here that the US national debt has officially surpassed 40 trillion, marking another staggering milestone in America's fiscal crisis. House Budget Chairman Jody Arrington released in the following statement. So this is his official statement, as he is the one that helps to set the budget for the United States and helps to kind of manage and regulate some of the mandatory and discretionary spending, to my understanding. So we have here, he says that America's debt has reached 40 trillion. It took nearly 200 years to accumulate the first 1 trillion. Now we had that much debt in less than 5 months. In fact, the federal government borrows 6 billion per day, over half of which is interest on the debt we already have, more than we budget for our entire national defense. Our national debt continues to pose an existential threat to the future of our nation. We're mortgaging our kids' entire future to pay for today's spending, promises we've made which we're unwilling to pay for ourselves. Here's the sad and sobering truth. Despite the urgency of our fiscal crisis, Congress has failed to muster the collective courage to meet the moment. It is for such reasons as this, our founding fathers included Article 5 of the Constitution, providing a path for the sovereign states to amend the Constitution in the face of a runaway federal government. Under this proceeding, we can finally pass a balanced budget amendment and rein in the unbridled spending that's driving our unsustainable debt. As James Madison said, the public debt is a public curse, greater than any other. I'm calling on the sovereign states to reverse the curse. So this is going to spark a bit of chaos here, because I'll need to go in and we can look into a little bit of Article 5 of the Constitution, but one thing we have to notice here is that there are several things that make up the US fiscal debt. So this was before all of this kicked off. And what they're actually showing here is that in Truth in Accounting, what they have speculated here is that the published national debt has exceeded 40 trillion. At the time of this, the true national debt, they put it around 174 trillion. This is all the debt held by the public, intergovernmental holdings, including debt held by Social Security and Medicare trust funds. It does not include total unfunded Social Security and Medicare promises. So this is interesting here. I was looking at this a little bit, and this talks about some of the things that the government owes. The government has 6.1 trillion in assets. So that's what the government has in its pocket that it can spend money on. The rest of that is borrowed government debt, which is normally comes through, we could say borrowing from the Federal Reserve, offshoring some of its debt through US treasuries and bonds, things like that. But with this, we have unfunded Medicare promises are 74.5 trillion. Unfunded Social Security promises are 54 trillion. Publicly held debt is 30.3 trillion. Pension and retiree healthcare liabilities are 15.5 trillion, and other liabilities amount to around 2 trillion. So the total bills is 176.4 trillion. Assets minus the bills is 170 trillion. Estimated deterioration to date is 5 trillion. So the true national debt is 175 trillion. And this is what Truth in Accounting has put on their website. You can go to their website and actually find this out. I think they've even published a debt clock here. Oh, there is the debt clock. Sorry. The debt clock is actually up here. We have the US national debt that has been published on the website for the United States Budget Committee. Now, these two things are very interesting. So that shows that there's kind of a bit of a schism between what is reported and what is actually present. So Truth in Accounting has its own estimate as to what the true debt is actually. A lot of that probably is not on the budget itself, comes from a lot of other different sources. One of the things I wanted to turn to was the Peter G. Peterson, that's quite a name there, Foundation. They produced this infographic shortly after the news broke, and it talks about the national debt is now more than 40 trillion. What does that mean? So we're looking at this, and it says the gross federal debt of the United States has surpassed 40 trillion. Although the debt affects each of us, it may be difficult to put in such a large number into perspective and fully understand its implications. The infographic below offers different ways of looking at the debt and its relationship to the economy, the budget, and American families. America's high and rising debt matters because it threatens our economic future. The COVID-19 pandemic rapidly accelerated our fiscal challenges, but we were already on an unsustainable path with structural drivers that existed long before the pandemic. Putting our nation on a better fiscal path will help ensure a stronger and more resilient economy in the future. So there's numerous things that have contributed to the debt and where it has arrived at this particular point. So the debt held by the public is 32 trillion. Intergovernmental debt is 8 trillion. So that's the 40 trillion that's come about. So in this infographic, this is a very good infographic because I was just kind of scrolling through the news a bit. We see here it says 40 trillion of this is approximately the value of the economies of China, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, and India combined. The debt is greater than those 5 economies. Put that into perspective just for a moment, just how mad that sounds to you. You know, me living in the UK and being a US citizen as well, I can see like on both sides of the Atlantic just how crazy that seems. This amounts to $297,000 per household. So each citizen of the United States, the government has put nearly $300,000 of debt on them before they're born. Well, before, you know, for each household. And before they're born is actually 117,000 per person in America. So each individual already comes saddled with 117,000 in debt. Think about that. The national debt is growing by approximately 4.8 million per minute. This is 285 million per hour and 6.8 billion per day. Every single day, the US incurs 6.8 billion more in debt. Based on the kind of things and the circumstances that have been, giving rise to the situation already. So another interesting fact here is we're spending 3 billion per day on interest payments on the debt. 3 billion per day just on interest. Now, these numbers to me have just kind of blown my mind because when you think about it, they always talk about the the student loan debt crisis. And they talk about the individual GDP spending debt crisis. People taking out credit cards just to pay for their rent and things. People not being able to pay back their student loans because mathematically it's impossibility for many people. Maybe back in the day it was a little bit easier. People, I think, waited during the Biden administration to try to get some of that debt for, written off or struck off. But nowadays, now with Trump back in power, he's basically held the line and is forcing people to pay those back. Now, we look here. I want to just look at one other story. We think about the kind of things that have kind of led to the rising debt in the United States. And I'll just throw some ideas off the top of my head that I'm aware of. We can go into a much greater kind of analysis of this as we kind of take it. I may get Mike B to get on here for the Sunday show, or at least to try to see some of the ideas that we can ping back and forth about these, causes. But some of the ones on the top of my head, you think about military spending, healthcare, Social Security. Those are usually some of the big ones. And then you have the debt that we send to other countries in order to pay for their things, giving Ukraine weapons, paying off things for, the European Union, all of the kind of vassal states around the world. A lot of money has been poured into Ukraine. A lot of money has been poured into the Middle East. The national debt has skyrocketed under this Iran war. And this is one reason why I kind of talk about this war so much, because much of it has come to the idea that this has ballooned the US's military spending in such a rapid rate. In 5 months, it's just been astronomical spending. And I'll see if I can go into this a little bit more. But we did speak about this in some of the previous podcasts. But let's come to see one of the big things that took place. An amazing bit of information was published by CNBC. Fed officials saw a need for rate hike if inflation doesn't cool. Minute show. So as we know, one of the major things that is contributing to the US debt is the inflation caused by quantitative easing. This is where the US government buys up assets. It prints money in order to pay for certain things. It buys up assets to kind of stave off the bleeding. And this is probably one of the biggest contributing factors to US debt, sovereign debt especially. So this makes the cost of living rise. This makes it more difficult for people to pay for homes, for people to take out loans, because the federal, the Fed chair, it used to be Powell, not too long ago before he left. And now we have, I think his name's Kevin Warsh. Yeah, Chairman Kevin Warsh. And he's now come in. He was supposed to be a Trump favorite. But once he got in, he realized oh shit, I don't think I'll be able to pay, convince the public to lower interest rates and allow for the Fed to lower interest rates so that people can take out, easier loans. It's not like in Japan where the loans have been around, hovering around 0 to 1%, where they can take out sovereign debt from the Bank of Japan and pay that back. So even though Bank of Japan has 250 so odds, percentage of GDP to debt, the United States doesn't have the same luxury because Japan owns its own debt through the Bank of Japan. The US is trying everything it can to kind of keep the US dollar in circulation. This is why I have been saying over and over again, the reason why this Iran war kicked off is because if Iran is trying to pivot to BRICS, the US is going to lose a significant portion of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and oil and gas within, the OPEC countries, where it can actually trade in US dollars. So trying to smash the state backfired horribly. Now we see us getting to this situation where we're looking at the United States and we're seeing that, the economic debt is actually skyrocketing. So I'm going to read a little bit about this, about what Warsh has been talking about. So the Federal Reserve officials indicated at the last meeting that they would need to raise interest rates soon. And unless there was more progress on bringing down inflation, minutes revealed on Wednesday. So this came out 3 hours ago. And now we have this news about the 40 trillion, I guess benchmark, if you want to say, or at least the milestone. In the minutes, it said many participants assessed that policy tightening would likely be necessary if inflation did not decline. And this was a summary of the meeting minutes that was held on July 28th to 29th. Some participants commented that financial conditions might not currently be sufficiently restrictive to facilitate a return of inflation to 2%. So that's the 2%. that the US has constantly said it needs to get this target in order for the economy to be at a healthy position. So ultimately, the Federal Open Market Committee voted 9-3 to keep the federal fund rates targeted in a range between 3.5 and 3.75%, where it is all where it has been all year. Sorry, can't get my words out. The overnight borrowing rate serves as a guidepost for the variety of consumer debt, including mortgages, credit cards, and auto loans. Those are the things that we just spoke about. Those who voted against the decision favored a 0.25 percentage point increase. Minutes indicated that the dissenters judged that doing so would likely help forestall the need for a steeper and potentially more costly sequence of tightening moves at a later stage. So I wanted to get to one particular point. Now, they're talking about all of this, and they're saying that they need to get everything down to 2%. But one of the things I wanted to, talk about is that recently there was a Supreme Court decision that struck down Trump's tariffs, and that's forcing, the United States to actually pay back a percentage of those tariffs. And I can actually pull that up for us, just to kind of show you what it's about. So this was the court case, and this came back a while back. It's early August. I think it was August 5th that this was reported. So the Trump administration pays back $100 billion in Liberation Day tariffs to businesses. So this represented 60% of all tariff revenue collected by the government under the policy, according to a recent court filing from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. However, a significant chunk of the money remains unpaid. Nearly $29 billion in potential refunds is undergoing review by trade authorities, while another $1.6 billion is stuck because importers have not yet supplied their banking details. So essentially what's happened is Trump wanted to impose these tariffs on countries around the world to get his way, and they basically said, fuck you, and decided not to pay. They're going to try to push, that nearly 30 billion in tariffs here. The United States is actually going to have, it says that they have paid back the $100 billion, which is about 78 billion pounds. So I just wanted to make sure I'm getting my, thoughts correct. So essentially the money that they've had to pay back is going back on their budget, which that, of course, is incurred in debt. So in order to pay that back, they have to print more money in order for them to have access to it, because they can't go into their own pockets and try to pay that money back. Ironically, the Supreme Court is ruled by Republicans at this point, or at least, dominated by Republicans. And yet they still chose to force them to pay back the funds. So looking into that, we have this statement here, U.S. State Court of International Trade. The judge that presided over it was the Honorable Richard K. Keaton, senior judge. And we just hear that it's going to be, let's just get to the too long did it read part. It is something for us to really think about. I'm going to actually stop sharing because I just want to get my thoughts right. This news has just come out, so I'm just sharing this with you. It is absolutely unthinkable how the US debt has ballooned or spiraled to this degree. A lot of it is due to runaway spending. It's not simply just a Trump thing. It's not simply a Biden thing, but it has been a bipartisan effort over the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, where it's just absolutely ballooned. Now, I was looking at some of the figures here. I think it was roughly around 2015 where everything started to kick off. And that was around the time of the Syrian invasion, where a lot of the US government, wanted to try to find a way to break down the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad, and finance a lot of those black projects that went into that. At the same time, you had nearly 11 years funding the Ukrainian puppet regime, which has consisted heavily of neo-Nazis under the Azov Battalion and the Pravdy sector, paramilitaries that have taken control of the of Kiev and the rest of the state early on. That has become a disaster. The Middle Eastern policy has become a disaster. There are no longer any functional military bases in the Middle Eastern region, save for in Israel and other places. Turkey, for example. A lot of the money that the United States has been spending, of course, the tariffs have actually widened the trade gap, and the spending on artificial intelligence has also become a huge issue right now because they're now talking about bailing out some of these companies in order for them to continue to stay afloat, ahead of their IPO. I think there was a news article that came out recently that talked about the new financial chief officer of OpenAI, because the recent one just quit. They said that the IPO would debut sometime in 2027, which is absolute bollocks, considering the fact that they haven't actually set a date for it, nor do they have the funds or the revenues to make that IPO a success, and they know that. So all the money that's been poured into these data centers, all the money that's been poured into companies like NVIDIA, into Intel, for example, who is still floundering. The United States pay for all of these fabs, these chip fabs, to come produce in the United States. And then all of a sudden, these chip fabs are not making any money. And Intel is still cratering. Even after all of that, there's just so much I could talk about this. I just wanted to really just bring you the news to at least get the conversation going. So if you're watching this, if you have watched this, thank you for your time and attention for this. But let me know in the comments below what you think is going on here. What are some of the major things that are contributing to the US debt? I'm going to leave it there. It's been a really interesting recording. There's going to be a lot of this news taking place over the next month. 40 trillion is unheard of for me. Like that's several countries' GDP combined. And, I'm just hoping the American people can find a way out. So if you like what you see here, please be sure to give a like, share, subscribe, comment below, be sure to subscribe and, tap the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our other conversations here. I'm going to leave it at that. So thank you so very much for your time and attention. Until next time, speak your mind, defend the truth, and keep your sanity. Take care, everyone.